Good afternoon, everyone. Carousel Technology would like to welcome you to our AWS webcast. Now I would like to introduce our speakers for today's session, Rutger Tomschutz, Vice President of Strategic Alliances at Qmulos, and Igor Volovich, Vice President of Compliance Strategy at Qmulos. Igor, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Kelsey, and thanks for having us on. Looking forward to this for a couple of weeks now, and we're finally here. So let's kick this off. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and for some reason, it's disabled.
Should be good to go now.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. Today's topic is next generation enterprise compliance, specifically for state, local governments, and educational organizations. State, local governments, and educational organizations need to ensure compliance with an ever-increasing number of frameworks such as CMMC, StateRAMP, and PCI. However, traditional compliance methods continue to rely on mostly manual data collection and controls validation, delivering partial snapshots of the risk posture that allow attackers to operate in a blind spot. Our approach is Converged Continuous Compliance, which enables ongoing real-time data-driven validation of cybersecurity controls, evolving compliance from a paper-based check-the-box exercise into a core risk and security management capability. This is what we'd like to talk to you about today. Why compliance matters more than ever. You might think that ransomware attacks and the things that you see in the news have little to do with compliance. And you would be right, because traditional compliance doesn't really fit the bill. It's kind of relegated to this check the box exercise. It's mandatory, it's required. It doesn't seem to have a lot of risk value, and it doesn't seem to give you a lot of risk context for ongoing security operations, things like threat hunting and incident response and incident mitigation. Yet, when compliance is done correctly, when it's done right, when it's done in a continuous manner, in a converged manner, and we'll talk about what that means in a minute. When it's done correctly, it can create that foundational layer of capabilities across your entire incident response, information security, risk management domain within your enterprise. Not only does it empower you to do more with your existing controls and your existing investments, but allows you to converge multiple functions into this single pane of glass model of visibility for risk, for threats, and for how your enterprise is doing on a day-to-day basis in terms of its risk and security posture. So we've seen a lot of attacks going on in the last couple of years, great increase of attacks, specifically within the educational and healthcare sectors. State and local governments are under attack at an increasing pace, and attackers are being opportunistic, but also they're going to schools and state and local governments because they see them sometimes as soft targets. We don't have enough investments in that space, and historically, they have been soft targets that are easy to penetrate. So there's definitely no shortage of news about this, and we know that there's a problem here. We're seeing now an average cost of about $2.73 million per ransomware attack for an educational institution. Recently, we saw terabytes of data being impacted by a ransomware attack in Japan. So many institutions are definitely seeing the impact. Why is compliance so hard, especially within the SLED markets? Well, compliance can be difficult, and it certainly is difficult for anyone who's coming to it new, and even for folks who have been doing it for a long time. A lot of the compliance processes have been built around paper, and we understand that. We've created a lot of these standards, we've created a lot of these frameworks, and at some point we lost sight of what they were meant to do. They were really meant to guide our implementation of controls, guide our implementation of mitigation capabilities for threats that matter to our specific environments. So in cases of PCI for cardholder environments, of course, those controls were developed for those use cases. And gradually over time, as control frameworks became more bloated and became more complex, they became more difficult to implement and manage. So it's not only about implementing the control framework, but it's really how do you continuously manage it? How do you maintain that posture? Because the controls are many, and when you start getting into the technical evidence and the technical controls themselves, it becomes pretty difficult to deal with. It's hard to put your hands around that. So doing it through manual processes, even though they've been somewhat augmented with automation, it's an incremental improvement. What you really are looking for is automation as a baseline capability within your entire compliance program. You want automated compliance. You don't want to automate existing compliance as much. You really are looking for some level of transformation. You're looking for some level, not just of incremental change, but really of shifting your entire mindset and your entire compliance model to more of an automated, converged, continuous compliance model. And a lot of it is wrapped around the fact that manual data calls is where we spend an enormous amount of time still in compliance, pulling data into spreadsheets, doing manual analytics, and kind of living between Excel and PowerPoint is our primary tools. Even folks who are a little more advanced and use things like Power BI or other analytical platforms, it's an incremental improvement, but it's not radical. It's not decisive. And decisive is really what we're trying to achieve here. We have seen an evolution of compliance. Of course, there's been different efforts around things like GRC, governance risk and compliance models, and platforms. So eGRC, that was definitely a push we've seen over the last 10 to 15 years. A lot of big platforms are still out there, and folks have made significant investments into those. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of difficulty that many enterprises, and especially in the educational and state and local government space, finding difficulty in implementing them and continuing to maintain them at a state of constant readiness. These tend to be very complex platforms. They tend to be fairly expensive, and kind of the care and feeding and the level of training that's required to continue to operate them can be somewhat cost prohibitive and difficult to justify as time goes on. So what we looked at is the idea of convergence as an inherent attribute of a platform, and that's what Qmulos has built. The idea was always, how do we create an automated compliance model? Not just take an existing compliance model and automate it, but how do we rebuild it? And that's what we focused on from day one. So our idea is to really see compliance and security as two pieces of the same function, which happens to be risk management. So when we look at it from the lens of risk management, we start to understand that there's no compliance data and security data. It's all just data. And those data sources, that technical evidence or technical elements, as we call them, can paint that picture. And it's really a matter of which perspective you're taking. If you're taking a compliance perspective or you're taking a security operations perspective, the data is still the same. And by working with Splunk as our technology partner, we rely on Splunk as our data layer, where we can collect any kind of data from any kind of device at any time on a real-time basis, and then make sense of it based on the use cases that we have. It's really any framework, depending on what you need, depending on what you're subject to, what kind of mandates you have. And also there's a future-proof capability that's built right into the platform, because we are data agnostic. By using Splunk, we're able to not only pull data from any source, but also we can apply different visualizations and different control models to present that data in the way that you need it. And really, it's about allowing your enterprise to operate on a faster pace. The faster you get to the compliance state, the faster you find out that something fell out of compliance, the faster you can get ahead of the threat, because we are facing threats that are occurring at machine speed. And our adversaries are unbounded by bureaucracy, meaning hackers don't wait for us to do audits. They don't wait for us to pass an audit and go, wow, we're not going to touch this environment because now we know they've passed their compliance audit. They operate at any time, and they use any means to get in. So for us to be able to get there faster, get there ahead of the threat, is absolutely paramount. And I'll pass the mic to Rutger.
Thanks, Igor. And I'd like to just pause there and provide a refresher on CMMC and StateRAMP and why those, well, those are two of the many, many frameworks that we, with our product Qcompliance, support out of the box. So and they're directly relevant to, say, local and education organizations. So quick refresher for those that are a little less familiar, and this is critical because these are mandates or frameworks that are going to go into effect relatively soon. And you need to be aware of it so that you can stay ahead of it and stay ahead of those auditors. So just real quick, in terms of cybersecurity maturity model certification, it's currently in version 1. Version 2 is not finalized. Our product's currently shipping with version 1, which is really 5 levels. What's the difference between version 1 and version 2? Version 2 eliminates levels 2 and 4 and removes some CMMC unique practices and all maturity processes from the CMMC model. Now, the CMMC may not look that different for those organizations that are already abiding by DFARS, which is Defense Federal Acquisition and Regulation Supplement, because it is built on DFARS and some of those NIST frameworks out there. But how is it relevant if this is primarily focused on the defense industrial base? How is that relevant to SLED, right? And that's because a number of those educational organizations, universities, and colleges out there have relationships with the DoD. My alma mater, for instance, has had contracts where they did research on behalf of the DoD, and consequently, they too will have to abide by CMMC standards. And it's kind of mind-boggling, but there's over 300,000 organizations that are going to have to be compliant with respect to this particular framework. Yes, 2025 looks far away, but if the past 2 years have taught me anything, it's time can fly, and before you know it, 2025 is going to be around the corner. Next, please. So a little bit about StateRAMP. Again, probably not all that different if you're familiar with FedRAMP, which is really the federal equivalent of StateRAMP. Now, StateRAMP's been recently released sometime late last year, and I saw, according to their website, they've now updated the website to show any accredited partners of theirs and accredited providers. And when I talk about providers, this is really those information as a service, SaaS, PaaS solutions out there. And it is those third parties where StateRAMP really applies. StateRAMP tries to achieve something similar to FedRAMP, like I said, by ensuring that those cloud service providers are secure for those state and local government agencies. On to you, Igor.
Thank you, Rutger. So let's talk about Splunk Cloud on AWS. Compliance historically has been deployed as a way to capture and manage enterprise risk, and we've had a lot of overlapping different standards and frameworks. And when you map it all out, you do see that a lot of those controls tend to fit many different frameworks and mandates. So it's a matter of comply once, report many. You probably have heard that many times before if you've talked to anybody about compliance in the last 10, 15 years. That's definitely the idea. As the compliance overheads become more increased, it's become more difficult to manage all of those different frameworks and mandates. We've seen also a lot, of course, and a lot of those processes are still very manual in their nature, even though they have some automation applied to them or some augmentation to the power of automation applied to them. That manual nature of the process and still continued reliance on manual human cycles to process, collect, store, and report that data and analyze the data leads to a lot more errors. So more compliance, more complexity, more errors, and you really are trying to get to a much more accurate risk picture. And in the cloud, things move a lot faster, both for the good guys and especially for the bad guys. So as more workloads became propagated into the cloud, we saw also the increase in attack traffic. We saw an increase in breach events. And so that's not unusual, right? As things become more complex, as things become faster, they become more accessible. Of course, things are very accessible in the cloud, and they're also very easy to put up, right? So ordinarily, it would take us forever to get something onboarded on-prem. In the cloud, it's a click of a mouse, and then you've got a workload running with real live data. It's very easy to do, and so we've seen things like shadow IT becoming a much more difficult to manage because, again, anybody can just put up a workload in the cloud. So as we've seen this huge migration to the cloud happening, especially over the last couple of years, it's become increasingly more important for us to get the compliance wrapper around all of those data stores and all of those workloads. So we've seen the move by many folks to also rely on the cloud providers' inherent security functions and their compliance features, and they tend to vary pretty widely. What's important is for you to maintain control and maintain that management window to your data and to your ability to manage that compliance data. So the objective here is go to where the data is, which means if it's in the cloud, then we should be in the cloud as well. So our ability to take our Converged Continuous Compliance model and put that in the cloud, have those same controls that we have that are mandated by all these controls frameworks, have those controls come in and provide the data for us, paint that picture, create that visibility to risk, and ensure that regardless of where those workloads live, on-prem, in a hybrid cloud, or in a cloud primarily, we get the data, we get it to tell us the story that we need it to tell us, and then we can continue to extend that perimeter of protection, even in a perimeter-less world that we're all living in, right? We were saying cloud basically took the perimeter away, and that's the reality, right? We're getting down to the granular level of a single data piece or a single user, and the ability to follow those new models and to support those new models, enable those new models, things like zero trust, right? That's the emerging framework that we're seeing out there. We've seen the CISA framework for zero trust implementation. We've seen a lot of the executive orders that are coming out now, especially the one that was released yesterday, again, reinforcing the idea that zero trust is very important and that we need to get a lot better about protecting our workloads regardless of where they live. So that's the idea around Splunk Cloud on AWS. If you're running on Amazon, you definitely want to be using Splunk to collect that data. And if you're using Splunk, Qmulos is the answer for Converged Continuous Compliance. It all kind of goes together. It's one big solution, and it's seamlessly integrated into whatever you're doing on Amazon already. And over to Rutger.
Thanks, Igor. So we touched a little bit about the urgency, right? The urgency for becoming compliant with respect to CMMC, StateRAMP, and other frameworks that we'll touch on a little later. But what is that solution that we're proposing? Igor alluded to it, and those are Q compliance and Q audit. But before I delve into that, let me give you a little bit more information about who we are and what we do. So a little bit about us. Qmulos was founded back in 2012, so not that very long ago, by a DHS executive by the name of Matt Coos. And for those that are familiar with the CDM project, for example, within the federal space, and he was there at the genesis. And he struggled with a lot of the same challenges that I'm sure listeners today are working or struggling through, right? And that is, how do you manage effectively all the data? How are you doing the data calls needed to become or ensure that you're compliant? How do you stay ahead of those adversaries, especially if you're working off of Excel spreadsheets from a couple months ago? And it became clear that there wasn't really any good way to do it the way it had been done in the past, right? No matter the size of the team, there had to be a better path forward. And he then became aware of big data, more specifically Splunk, and that is really what we built our solutions around. Splunk, for those that are a little less familiar, is this big data analytics platform that is phenomenal at ingesting data, whether it's compressed, ASCII, it could be binary, REST API calls, database calls, it doesn't matter. It is a sponge for your data, which makes it really easy to consolidate all your data into one place. Now you can do really cool things like correlate across disparate data sets, seeing things that you may not have been able to see previously because you're pivoting between multiple different data sources, looking at one instance at an email and another instance maybe at a spreadsheet, and seeing where the commonalities and the connections are becomes near impossible. So moving forward with big data analytics platform, we built our solutions, as I mentioned, Q Compliance and Q Audit atop of. Both are premium Splunk applications, and they peer into your organization's data, whether that's on-prem or in the cloud. Now, as Igor mentioned, we're seeing more and more of our customers moving to the cloud for a number of reasons, right? And it then becomes critical that you're able to ensure that not only is the data that you're ingesting from the cloud being mapped to your various frameworks that you care about, but also the data that comes off your on-prem endpoints until you're fully migrated to the cloud. So we do support those hybrid architectures as well. Now, a little bit more about our products before I go into more of a deep dive. Q Compliance is our flagship application, and it is that next-gen GRC solution. We take everything that you know and love about those governance, risk, and compliance tools, but then add additional automation, continuous monitoring, all driven by near real-time data, which is a game changer. That is something that none of our competitors do, while at the same time giving you full visibility into your entire compliance posture. No matter what time, day or night, you know exactly where you stand, which is game changing. Secondly, Q Audit. Q Audit is our sister application to Q Compliance. Now, if you're aware of how Splunk works, both run atop of a Splunk search head. So all you need is just a core install of Splunk. You deploy our applications, whether it's Q Compliance or Q Audit or both, on top of the search head, which provides that web front end. And from there, you have an easy to use graphical interface. Q Audit provides you with insights around insider threat. It's built on what we consider the gold standard, Intelligence Community Standard 500-27. And this is one that has been recognized not only within the intelligence community standard and the public sector, but is really seen as the standard when it comes to audit logging and for any programs that take that seriously. How did it come about? I'm sure everyone's familiar with Snowden, and that's what prompted Congress to create this framework. So, as mentioned, you can run it independent or together complementing Q Compliance. Our customers are of all sizes, small, medium, large, whether that's DoD, public sector, state, local education, and private sector. Really, the thing that I'd love for everyone to take away from today's meeting is remember that we are really changing the script on compliance. We're taking it from, as Igor mentioned, this check the box exercise and making it security relevant once again. So that's huge. And so no longer are you just ensuring that you're compliant, but you're also driving security value, staying ahead of those adversaries, working off of real-time data, not data that you looked at from a couple months ago. Thanks, Igor.
Thank you, Rutger. So the idea of converged continuous compliance, again, it's the idea of bringing security and compliance together. We're talking about dynamic collection, meaning we take any data, we take all comers, any data that we can get, we bring it in, and that's where Splunk comes in, and it's extremely capable in bringing any data in, schematizing it, figuring out what it means, and then giving you the power to pivot that data by really any value that you'd like. We take that power, we leverage it, and then we create our products based on that power, on that capability. So we're talking about ongoing assessment, we're talking about ongoing authorization, continuous monitoring, which means we're not waiting for that monthly or quarterly or annual cadence. We're not waiting for the audit to come through. We're not waiting for, to sit down with our system owners to get the data from them. We don't have to call around and beg for that data, as a lot of ISOs spend their lifetime doing. It's automated. The data is already there. And if there's any technical evidence that we can collect, then we can collect it. And then automate as much of this domain as possible, giving those cycles, those human cycles, the very expensive cycles, back to the people, meaning the teams can then shift their focus on really making decisions, focusing on strategy, figuring out where to prioritize their limited resources, where to defend forward, where to put their layer of protection around specific crown jewels and assets that need that protection. It's about risk visibility, and it's about prioritizing those limited resources. And I'll pivot over to Rutger to tell us a little more about how this actually works.
Oh, those are all excellent points, Igor. So for those that are a little less familiar with Splunk architecture, let me just break it down very simply. The way the product works is you have products, whether that's servers, workstations, think Linux, Windows, Active Directory, your routers, firewalls, that amazing data coming out of AWS. This is a treasure trove of data, but looking at it individually or through disparate data sets becomes a nightmare. So bringing it all from the left-hand side into that center panel, bringing it all into Splunk, collecting it in one place, and then tagging the data and mapping it to data models that drive then hundreds. We have over 500 analytics that drive visualizations that enable you to automate the passing and failing of controls, and a whole slew of other things allows you to stay ahead of the adversaries. Ensure that when the CISO asks, are we compliant with respect to StateRAMP, CMMC, you know exactly where you stand, where the gaps are, so that you can then exactly pinpoint where the resources need to be applied and address any issues or any gaps in your environment to ensure that you are compliant with said frameworks. One of the things that I'd like to clarify is that we'd like to make sure that you only collect once, but then can report many, right? So this is not an exercise where you're pinging those routers and firewalls or any other endpoint or data source multiple times. You collect the data once, pull it into Splunk, and now, depending on the lens that you want to apply, it's a simple dropdown. Do you care to look at it from a PCI, or is it a HIPAA, or is it a StateRAMP or CMMC? It's all there. It depends on how you want to look at it, how you want to approach it. Our product recalculates, presents it in a manner for you to easily ingest and then make business decisions off of. So I think those are huge differentiators. And hopefully that gives you a better sense for how our products work at a very high level. And towards the end of the conversation today, we'll go into a very brief demo to give you a better sense for what this looks like and feels like outside of a slide deck. Back to you, Igor.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rutger. And another point that I'd love to make here while we're on this slide is everybody has different mandates, but also everyone has different baselines. So they may not have to comply at the same level as a peer environment might be, even in the same segment, same sector, even in the same area. Different folks operate at different cadences and different needs. And so you might set a different clipping level or a different baseline for compliance. And you might say, we are compliant at a certain level, and that's where we're happy. And that could be a point on your maturity journey towards better compliance, more automated compliance. And that's the idea. And Qmulos Converged Continuous Compliance grows with you. It takes you on that journey, and it can capture your current state. It can automate it. It can get you a lot more visibility, a lot more capability, and at the same time, take you on this journey to higher maturity at your pace. And so if today you need to be at CMMC level 1, that's fine. We can get you there. If you need to be at level 3, we can get you there too, on your pace, right? At your pace. So that's the point, right? You don't have to transform all at once. And a lot of folks get a little scared by that. Transformation can be scary. Status quo can be comfortable. So we're trying to take folks on that journey with us and help them grow, help them get to that higher level of capability, automation, and better resource utilization. And that's really what it's about. So moving on, how do we compare against legacy GRC? GRC standing for Governance, Risk, and Compliance Platforms. Well, legacy GRC tends to be fairly limited in its control coverage. It tends to be really about the platform itself and less about the actual needs of the client. We found that empirically over the years, although some of these platforms have gotten really big and very complex, and they certainly offer a lot of features, in terms of actual control coverage, they may not be as comprehensive. Because we are completely agnostic when it comes to the actual controls, because we are, again, working with Splunk as our data layer, we don't really care. Anything can be a technical evidence for us, a piece of technical evidence or a source of technical evidence. We're also very big on looking at that bidirectionally, meaning looking for a smart sensor that can only feed us data, but also can be used as a mitigation device or control. So when an incident happens, for instance, closing a port on the firewall, that doesn't have to be a manual event, right? So again, creating that automation, creating that capability in conjunction with different partners that we have on the technology side enables you to not only find the problem, but also fix the problem in real time as an incident is going live. So that's more of an advanced capability. But again, having visibility to that granular level, that's very difficult to achieve without automation, and that's exactly what we enable. Accuracy, another big concern, making sure that you eliminate as many human cycles, because human cycles lead to human errors. So automation, again, drives accuracy, going directly to the source of that data, going to those controls, going to the actual systems instead of system owners, allows us to not only bypass a lot of that organizational hierarchy and some of that bureaucracy, but also increases the efficiency and gets you that data quicker and with a lot more accuracy and fidelity. The way that these systems typically are built, old legacy GRC systems are built usually on relational databases. You're looking at your SQLs and Oracles and SAPs, and it can be tough to adapt these rigid databases to the needs of a kind of a dynamic, ever-evolving compliance and security platform. We never looked at those. We always looked at Splunk and big data analytics as the core foundational layer of our technology. So it's adaptable by design, and it always will be. So we looked at it as kind of this core function of who we are and what we deliver to the marketplace. So for us, it could never be something rigid like that. So it was always about big data analytics. Timeliness, being near real time or as close to it as you can get. It's tough to achieve. Again, if you're going manual, it's tough. If you're doing static snapshots of your environment, first of all, that's difficult to do. Secondly, even if you have some magic capability to reach out and touch every piece of your infrastructure and pull that data in, it can become overwhelming. Just collecting that data itself, storing that data, managing that storage, making sure the data is accurate, and then protecting that storage, that can be tough. So moving, again, as much of your compliance model towards real-time monitoring down to a level of a single control, it becomes very difficult to do without a lot of that automation that we bring to the table, and again, without relying on the big data analytics and sort of having Splunk as your data sponge. And then cost effectiveness. Of course, a lot of compliance programs that we see out there are still very much manually driven. Either the processes themselves are manual, or even with a little bit of automation sprinkled in. By and large, a lot of folks in the compliance world live by Excel and PowerPoint, as we said before. So again, shifting those resources towards smarter tasks that really do require human interaction. It's really one of the core reasons for us to have built Qmulos, and that's why we exist. We want smart security. We want that converged continuous compliance, driving better resource utilization, so we can spend these limited cycles that we have on the human side really chasing the bad guys out of our environment, keeping our crown jewels protected, and enabling our core mission to be executed in a secure manner. So that's really what we focus on. And again, on the right-hand side of the slide, you see sort of a recounting of those points. And really what we think of ourselves is a value multiplier for existing investments, meaning whatever you've invested into, any kind of infrastructure, any kind of a security tool, or not even a security tool, right? Depending on how you view your technology stack, you might look at it from a converged perspective, which is more of an evolved view, right? Where it's not just, we have security tools and then we have IT tools. It's just technology. The entire technology stack can be thought of as a security investment when you provide the context that we provide, where every piece of technology can be viewed as a smart sensor, even if it's not that smart, it's still a source of data. It's a source of insight. And in the proper context, by converging and combining that data with other data sources and then overlapping it with your compliance mandates, we're able to extract those insights virtually from any piece of your infrastructure. So even if you have legacy systems, even if you have legacy applications, legacy pieces of your infrastructure, they can take on a new life. They can extend their lifetime by becoming part of your security apparatus, again, by employing that converged continuous compliance model. And on to Rutger to give us a quick rundown of our Q Compliance and Q Audit products.
Thanks, Igor. Yeah, so I want to provide a overview of Q Compliance and Q Audit before we delve into our demo. So Q Compliance, first and foremost, as a reminder, is that next-gen GRC solution. And we really built our product around the RMF, right? So risk management framework. So you have steps 1 through 6 here, and it all starts with step 1. Unfortunately, it's probably a little bit of a eye chart this time around, but follow along with me. So in step 1, you're able to identify and categorize those systems. Our product allows you to build out your entire organization, no matter whether small or large, no matter how wide or deep within our application. That also means that we're multi-tenant capable. So if you're part of a large organization that has multiple sub-orgs, sub-orgs, and you want to make sure that individuals only have visibility to what is relevant to them, that is absolutely doable because we layered on that additional security. So categorized system is that first step. You're creating those system boundaries, and those system boundaries are really just a collection of assets like workstations, servers, et cetera, that I mentioned earlier. Moving on to step 2, you're selecting the controls, but because we realize just because you adhere to a particular framework doesn't mean that you necessarily care about every single control within the framework. So here you can tailor the framework exactly to your needs, cutting out any sort of noise, and also identifying which controls you then want to include in the Conmon dashboard. More on that to come. Step 3, this is where it starts getting interesting, right? We're ingesting data. And you probably remember that slide earlier that Igor and I showed you, where you're pulling data from various disparate data sources, right? So you're really prepping the pumps for Conmon at this stage. You're ingesting that data. That is what becomes that technical evidence that then automatically gets mapped to the various frameworks, doing a lot of that heavy lifting for you. Step 4, right? This is where it really starts getting interesting. 4 and 5 and 6 is where we really separate ourselves from the herd. In step 4, you're identifying controls, right? You're passing and failing various controls. This is a step where you can actually automate either the passing or failing based on technical evidence that is being ingested. And I can demo some of that here in a little bit. But that's where we're able to give time back to you so that you're no longer just glued to dashboards or glued to a window. The system will alert you, whether that's text message, Slack, you name it, email. It could be a number of things. We offer a multitude of integrations to make it as easy and your life as nimble as possible. So now you can actually stay on top of where you stand from a compliance perspective. But again, going back to that security value, we're driving operational security. Step 5, authorizing systems, right? This is typically done manually, and there's a whole lot of effort that has historically been involved to ensure that you can either authorize or rescind the authorization for a system. The cool thing here is that based on the collective passing or failing controls, you'll get a score. That score can then be used as a threshold to then determine whether to automatically, again, here's one of those key terms, automatically authorize the system. So no longer do you have to stay on top of that either. And this is yet another way where we're giving time back to your day so that you can actually focus on driving the business forward. And then 6, this is where I get really excited because now we're talking about Conmon, right? Holistic continuous monitoring of all your technical controls that is security relevant. This is where ISOs and compliance SMEs love to be, right? This is the most critical controls to them and is completely tailored to their needs, right? So you get to select what shows up on the Conmon dashboard. By simply clicking on any one of those tiles, you can probably see that there's some green, red, and yellow or orange tiles. You can quickly pull up relevant dashboards, which then presents you with relevant evidence as to what is going on and gives you insight as to why it's passing, which is green, or red, why it's failing. And from there, you can then click into the relevant control to get all the nitty-gritty details, all without knowing any bit of SPL, which is that Splunk query language. Next. And as I mentioned, right, we've been primarily talking about CMMC and StateRAMP, and I think I might have alluded to PCI. But as you can see, there's a whole slew of other frameworks that are applicable to those state, local, and education organizations. I've just listed a few of them here on this slide, but this is not the only frameworks that we support out of the box. We support many more, and we're continually adding more based on what we're hearing back from our customers and partners and individuals that we meet with. So if there's a framework that you don't see here, reach out to us and we can verify that we either support it out of the box. But in addition to supporting many, many frameworks, what's also cool and very different is that we also support the ability to create your own framework. Because again, go back to what I shared earlier, you have hundreds and hundreds of analytics and visuals to pull from. So you can, we've got customers who are not subscribed to a particular framework, but they're inspired by them. So they can then pull together all the relevant dashboards and visuals and then bundle it with alerting and automation to really address their needs. And that is completely unique as well. Next. So very quickly, Audit, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, is really that smaller, more nimble SysRAP. And it is built around that ICS 500-27 audit policy, right? So there's a number of families, and I've listed them on the slide. Not going to go into them in detail, but it's really helpful for those that want to build out that audit policy or that audit program and get that visibility. It's very structured and very straightforward, and you don't need a whole lot of data sources in order to ensure that you are indeed meeting these particular requirements that are spelled out into this framework. Next, please. So this is just a simple screenshot from Qaudit, but as I mentioned, while this is mandated for classified networks, we found that it is really the standard to follow when you are looking to ensure that you're staying ahead of those insider threats, that you're implementing a very prescriptive audit policy for your organization, and you want to stay on top of any outliers, right? And that is what this product will help you do. It's going to help you identify through machine learning and other ingenious technology any outliers when it applies to not only users, but as well as hosts, right? So it's identifying those trends and then calling out where things look suspicious so that you can then jump in there and figure out what the heck's going on and address them before they become security threats. So I think at this point, I'm just going to pivot into share my screen. Just bear with me. All right, so wonderful. So I'm actually in our demo environment at this point in time. What I've done is logged in, not much different from your typical Splunk experience, and I've navigated to our Q Compliance app. Now, for the sake of today's demonstration, because we have a very limited amount of time, I want to focus on a couple of the frameworks that we touched on today. So specifically, StateRAMP and CMMC. So let's drop into the compliance scorecard for CMMC. Again, what I showed you on that previous screen is not all the frameworks we support. It's just the ones that we currently have loaded in our demo environment. So keep that in mind. This is just demo data that's being used. So very quickly, right now it's built to support version 1 because CMMC version 2 is still not yet finalized. As soon as version 2 gets finalized, our development team will then lock that down and then release an update shortly thereafter. We release 4 major updates throughout the year. So every quarter, you should expect at least 1 major update. And like I said, we bundle updates and other cool features with those releases, ensuring that our customers have the latest and greatest when it comes to the frameworks that they care about. So here you can quickly see at a glance where you stand with respect to the processes, the practices for CMMC. And if, let's say, I see that I'm 80% for access control, right? AC for access control, I can click into that. Okay, a little bit more information. Cool. Clicking in here, I can see that there is some failing controls. Well, that's interesting. Clicking on the chevron to the left-hand side expands this particular practice to give me the controls that make up that particular practice. And I can quickly see here that AC17 and AC03 are both passing. They have a score of 100, but then AC02 is the outlier. So let me figure out why this is failing. So I'm just going to click in, no magic here. And this brings up the control compliance. This is the nuts and bolts of our product. Every single control, so over 1,000 controls, has one of these. And it really simplifies things because it provides that continuous look and feel across the various controls. And I can quickly see here, oh, okay. The reason why it's failing is that either it automatically or manually was set to fail by audit or the assessment status. And we support both assessments and audits. And depending on your role, you can either update one or both. Now I'm an admin in this environment, so I can do either or. And I can quickly change this, right? So I can see here under assessment findings, why it failed, when it failed, by whom it actually was failed by. And I can go back all the way until this product was installed back in 2017 to see what's happened, which is really cool. I can then add findings. I can then pass or fail this particular control. Through that dropdown, I can see all the control information, the ODPs, the supplemental guidance around here. So there's no need to memorize anything as far as this control goes. And I can also see all the relevant related controls. So I'm going to leave that alone for now and scroll down, and I can see that there are some failing results. And I can also see that the reason why this probably was failed because the policy that we're working within in this demo environment is that we should fail this particular control, which is AC02, if it finds that there are accounts that are deleted. We only want to disable, which is over here, but since they've been found to be deleted, it failed. And what's cool is you can click this bell right here by hovering, and you can automate this. So whenever you find, like what's being demonstrated here, that you have the evidence that shows that your policy is failing, have that actually fail the control, right? So that when you roll in the morning with your coffee, you can get that alert on the way and ensure that you jump on it and figure out, is it because there's someone nefarious on the network that's trying to cover their tracks by deleting accounts that they may have created? Or is it maybe that there's someone within the team that's not trained on how to properly disable accounts, but it instead has resorted to deleting accounts? Either way, there's action that needs to be taken. But scrolling down, you can see all this amazing technical data that you can click on to drill into to get further more information. And here you can see the number of deleted events. And down here, you can see assigned events. So for any of these controls, you can even upload evidence or link to document source. So even for those controls that don't necessarily have technical evidence, or where technical evidence wouldn't necessarily be relevant, you can still capture evidence, providing that one-stop shop for all your compliance needs. So very different. I'm going to close out of this and drop back. So very quick overview of CMMC and some of the dashboards as that relates. But then we have StateRAMP, and you can see that there's a couple different scorecards. So you have the risk scorecard and then a compliance scorecard. I'm just going to touch on the compliance scorecard for now. And again, you know, dropping into here, very easy to do. Frameworks, it's just a matter of selecting, and then it automatically dynamically updates your dashboard. And here again, I can go ahead and click in, and I can, because I'm seeing 93.15% for category 1, I can then scroll and really click into any one of these, right? Again, ACO2 is failing. I can simply click in to, again, drop in to the control compliance hub to do further analysis. And as I mentioned, right, you don't have to know Splunk. It's just a matter of clicking into any one of these. So when I'm talking about that, right, just click in and you can see the raw logs, the data that's coming off your endpoints. Maybe that's Active Directory. So you can exactly see who's doing what, when it happened, etc. And then finally, I think it's worth mentioning that, excuse me, there's the Conmon Dashboard that I alluded to earlier, right? This is one of those differentiators that is just so ahead of its time, right? So ACO2, these are controls that I tailored for my experience. These are the ones that are most important to me, and they're being monitored on a daily frequency. I can select on a weekly or monthly. So no longer am I having to look at my Outlook calendar to then refresh myself as to what control is pertinent on which day, etc. It's all here. So again, click and bam, all the technical relevant evidence presented to you within one click. And again, you know, like I showed you earlier, it's just a matter of clicking into ACO2 to then dive one layer deeper, and you can then see all the evidence that's pertinent to you. The beautiful thing here is that as you lead up to an audit, right, you can then go through and assess your entire organization, make sure that you're ready, and then when an auditor shows up, you create the account, give them the auditor role, and set them in front of Q Compliance, and they have all the evidence, all the information that you've collected over the past period of time, and they see exactly what you've been doing, when you've been doing it, and then they can do their thing without having to involve a bunch of other teams. And the beautiful thing here is that it cuts down the amount of time audits take, and just makes everything that much more pleasant, much more quick. And with that, I think I'm going to pause, see if there's any questions. Lisa, any questions so far?
I have had a few come in. So the first one is, do you provide services or support for Qmulos deployment?
Yes, that is a good question. So we do have a fully staffed, fully accredited staff of engineers. We're, I think outside of Splunk, we're probably the largest Splunk PS org out there. And yes, we can definitely help in not only deploying our products, but also in training any of our customers on how to onboard data, work within our solution, and to maximize that value and get that quick return on investment.
And I think this one kind of, your answer sort of feeds into this next question. Do we need to be trained on Splunk to use Qmulos?
Right. So definitely knowing some core Splunk concepts is helpful when deploying, right? So that would definitely be a good thing to have. But if you don't have those resources in-house, being able to leverage our solution coupled with our professional services, but then also I think it's worth mentioning that we're one of very, very few, might still be the only one, that third-party organization with that's accredited with apps on Splunk Cloud. And Splunk Cloud is that full software as a service solution provided by Splunk atop of AWS. So that is another alternative if the customer does not have those Splunk resources in-house.
Okay, next question. Is there a limit on the number of data sources that feed into Splunk?
No, and that's the beautiful thing, right? It's there's no limit. We see security value in all types of data sources. Our professional services will help you in tuning the platform and identifying which data sources and what data coming out of said data sources are pertinent to the frameworks and the controls that you care most about.
Okay, and final question. What happens to an organization if they fail an audit?
Yeah, no, that's the one thing that everyone dreads, right? It's failing that audit. And depending on the organization, there can be massive repercussions, right? That could be loss of funding, right? If you're a agency, or it could be not so much funding, but there are repercussions. But then in terms of any organizations that are supporting DoD, and going back to CMMC, right? If you're a educational institution that has a contract with the DoD, then you have to become CMMC compliant. If you don't, then unfortunately you'll probably end up losing it. And worse yet, you won't be able to bid on any future contracts that require that CMMC compliancy. So definitely huge repercussions, in addition to, of course, what I hope doesn't have to be said, which is you're, of course, if you're not compliant, it probably means that you're not staying on top of your security posture, ensuring that you have that secure baseline and you're doing the core tenets of those best practices that is preached within security. That was really the initial intention of compliance, was to provide just a starting point on which you could then build your security house atop of, right? And it's really, once you have that baseline in place, that's when you can start looking for those zero-day vulnerabilities and all these really cool things to stay ahead of the threat actors. But if you don't have a solid foundation, then really you're building a house upon quicksand. And that's I think what unfortunately would happen if you're completely ignoring some of those basic tenets that compliance is trying to encourage you to follow.
Thank you, Rutger.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Rutger and Elisa, for answering our questions today. I'd like to thank our participants for joining, as well as Rutger, Igor, and Elisa for presenting and answering our questions. We hope this webcast has been helpful for you and your organization.